Welcome to Third Floor Views, a production of Chesapeake Family Life, where we talk about health, education, and living with kids. I'm your host, Laura Boycourt. We're approaching the end of Autism Acceptance Month, so today we'll be discussing autism. And joining us are Dr. Rebecca Landa, the founder and director of Kennedy Krieger Center for Autism and Related Disorders, and Andy Stettner, an autism dad and vice president of the Howard County Autism Society. Thank you both for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So I'd like to start with you, Dr. Landa. If you could just fill us in about your background and expertise. How did you first get involved with autism and your work at the Center for Autism and Related Disorders?
Well, I'm a speech-language pathologist by training, and after I finished my PhD, I completed a postdoc at Johns Hopkins in psychiatric genetics. And that was the first study, family study of autism. And it was being done because there had been the first twin study ever done that showed that autism was heritable. And so I jumped into autism in that way. And the more I got into it, the more I realized there just really weren't adequate services for autistic people or families. And so that's when I founded the Center for Autism and Related Disorders, which is a comprehensive, interdisciplinary clinical research outreach and training center.
Wow, fantastic. And same question for you, Andy. What's your background? What's your connection to autism? And could you also tell us a little bit about what you do at the Howard County Autism Society?
Sure. Well, I got involved in the autism community after my daughter was diagnosed with autism around 6.5 years ago. And with the Howard County Autism Society, we seek to create a more inclusive and accepting community for everyone in the autism community, making sure families get the resources they need and working on things like education, housing, and social acceptance.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. So for viewers and listeners who, might have an idea of what autism is, I was hoping that we could define autism spectrum disorder, or ASD. The Autism Society of America defines autism as a complex, lifelong developmental condition that typically appears during early childhood and potentially impacting a person's social skills, communication, relationships, and self-regulation. Dr. Landa, could you sort of elaborate a bit on what ASD is?
Sure. Very good explanation. And I know Andy's going to talk in a few minutes about what it is like from a lived perspective. From a clinical perspective, what happens is when people start to encounter functional impairments in their social or communication or sensory processing or other aspects of their regular self-regulation, they come to clinical attention. And that's when we start putting children or evaluating in a very systematic way, looking for differences in social communication, such as difficulty responding to their name, initiating social communication, spontaneously imitating others, being able to understand and what other people are intending when they look at something or point to something. And then there's usually some difficulties with sensory processing, either being overly sensitive or undersensitive to sensory stimuli, as well as an intense focus on certain types of topics or aspects of play, and some resistance to change can also happen.
Okay. And who generally has autism? I know the CDC reports that I believe it's 1 in 36 children. Does that sound about right, Dr. Landa?
That's the new statistic, yes.
Okay, but it can, it spans the ages. It just depends, there are lots of ages of individuals with autism, as we know. So, but 1 in 36 children. Okay. And Andy, what ranges of individuals with autism do you interact with and provide support for there at HCAS?
Yeah, the Autism Society really tries to help people with autism at all ages and stages of life. A lot of people, the organization was founded by parents with children with autism. But even here in Howard County, I think across the country, it's evolved to serve adults and more, incorporate the voices of autistic young adults and adults into our programming and strategy and activities. I think that's been an area that, we have had more services, traditionally, my daughter first started services at KKI with some of Dr. Landa's colleagues when she was, 2.5 years old. There's a lot more services for kids than there are adults. So we really are trying to make this kind of a whole lifespan, strategy.
Oh, that's wonderful. And I know, Dr. Landa, you touched on it a little bit, but how to recognize autism? What should parents know? What should they look for? If they suspect that their child may be autistic, or perhaps, just sort of red flags that they might say, oh, in retrospect, that that was actually a symptom. So Dr. Landa, could you tell us a little bit about what they should be aware of?
I'm really glad that you asked that, because it can actually look different at different ages. And so we really can't diagnose autism in the first year of life. We used to think that babies who were going to end up with an autism diagnosis would look autistic as infants. That's not the case in most cases. So in a very young child, let's say a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old, what's happening is that the children are not responding well to their name. Language usually isn't emerging as expected, although that's not necessarily always true. Children are not initiating social communication by pointing things out that are interesting to them. They're not just spontaneously looking at people and smiling, or they may line up toys. They may only play with a couple of types of toys, and they may play with them very repetitively. Now let's fast forward to a child has neurotypical language levels, who was doing pretty okay socially until they got into school. Once kids get into school, if they have no cognitive delays and they also are pretty capable linguistically, sometimes they can slip under the radar. But once they get in school, the social expectations increase. And that's where you start seeing things like difficulties staying on other people's topic, interrupting people, having social faux pas, like, and sometimes, a young man gave me the example that he used to like to smell girls' hair. So, not sort of knowing where those boundaries are. And so that's an example. And there's also sometimes subtle differences in females too. And for females, their particular interests can be things that are pretty conventional. And so people think, oh, well, that's not unusual, so it can't be autism. So, we have to even look sort of under the little stones sometimes to really listen to people about their experiences and what they're feeling, so that we can understand what the symptoms are and if they're there. And one thing I always tell parents, this is not fleeting. So if your child stops interacting very much around a very stressful event in the family, like you moved, or there's been a divorce, or the child's coming out of a significant illness, they're going to bounce back by and large. These things are multi-system, they stay for a while. They stay.
Okay. So some variation case by case basis, but there are sort of those traditional finite things that can appear. So it can go both ways. So I'd like to talk about what autism might look like in someone's day-to-day life. I know some autistic individuals need near constant support, while others, live life relatively independently. Andy, I'd love to hear about your experience, possibly with your daughter, or just other folks that you've come to know and interact with through HCAS.
Yeah, I also want to just comment on the last question,
Sure.
just
Absolutely.
maybe some more practical advice, for parents. And Dr. Landa's description was, fantastic. But maybe just to break it down and some things to look for. Many of your listeners are going to go to their, 2-year-old, 3-year-old, 4-year-old pediatric visit. If your child is not hitting the developmental milestones, in those visits, and there's significant, delays, don't take it seriously. Try to understand it, seek additional help. There can be medical issues that can, impact something that might look at like autism for a young kid, like maybe someone's, not speaking because of, other issues, hearing, other issues, but, don't, dismiss the possibility that your child may have developmental delays. The real purpose of that, is just to get, your child the services they need. getting an, autism diagnosis, really it's about, flagging your child for, the educational system and the healthcare system that you need additional support. So it's not, I think it's really scary, to go through as a parent, because some of the connotations of autism, but it's really important, and I really do think that pediatrician visit is a great place to start. Your pediatrician may not know a lot about it, but they will, do a developmental assessment. They'll let you know, how your child is doing. And so I think, and that's important because I think if you know one autistic person, you know one autistic person. It really is different, for every person, with autism. The statistics you mentioned, about half of autistic children also have intellectual and developmental disabilities, which means they're struggling with, cognitive, development, being able to do the things that other kids their age can do at school, and things around self-care. So, some, children and adults need, really a high level of support, with, basic living, needs, supervision. Others need, more targeted support, mental health, social support, educational and employment support, to, meet their needs. So it really is varied, significantly what, supports our need. What everybody needs, is acceptance. And that's what, Autism Acceptance Month is about. Not, we have members of HCAS who have college degrees, and are in the top 5% in topics like mathematics and computer science, and we're unemployed, because, there isn't the acceptance, and the awareness, in the general public, that someone can really be maybe different in terms of their, their personality and their way of dealing, but still can be very productive. And, for example, through our autism hiring program, we've gotten, those members jobs at places as esteemed as NSA and the Defense Research Agency, because they have a lot of skills and talents to bring. So I think it is really varied, but what everybody needs is acceptance.
And that's a great segue to the next part of the interview, I guess. Dr. Landa, what are some things that are important to keep in mind about autism? What misconceptions might exist? And then Andy, we'll go to you on that as well after Dr. Landa.
Well, first I want to really say, rah, Andy, such really good practical and point on comments there. Myths, just like Andy said, just because somebody looks different than you, behaves different from you, doesn't mean that they aren't capable. Second of all, you can't assume that a person has a flat profile of strengths. People have strengths and, I guess for lack of a better word, weaknesses. Every one of us has that. It's just that people who aren't autistic, sometimes they can cover up their weaknesses better and easier. And so they're not as apparent to people. Also, people who aren't speaking, who are what people call nonverbal or non-speaking with autism, can have very strong linguistic skills. And so, back to Andy's point about parents, we always assume competence, right? But we also want to understand what supports the person has to be their best selves.
That makes sense. Andy, what were you going to say on maybe some other misconceptions, myths, things to keep in mind?
Well, I mean, I think, I would second what Dr. Landa said. I think people know about autism. They may have certain, ideas that people who are autistic don't love or have the same emotions, as other people that, that came in, through, movies like Rain Man or, even newer shows like that newer show Atypical. You kind of have that kind of frame, that popular perception. I think, that's just kind of a stereotype, and maybe autistic people will show love in, different ways. But, it's not that they don't care very much about, the people in their lives. Also this idea that, autistic people can't, do, that they're all going to be someone who has the ability to memorize a lot of numbers or, that's also just that's true for some autistic people have special skills,
Mhm.
but that's not true for for all autistic people. I think the hardest thing is when many people see a person with disabilities, they move the other way. They kind of don't, and so just that ability to, just because someone's acting different doesn't mean that they're not part of our community. And they're not someone that you can find a way to interact with, and just interact with it maybe in a different way than you're used to. Especially important for kids. I think it's always a challenge for kids to know how to interact with people that are different.
Sure. I'm so glad you said that. Dr. Landa, I know you're doing some exciting things at your center. Could you tell us about some of the breakthroughs in your autism research, as well as the need for diversity in your research? Any progress that's been made, maybe in the workplace, interventions, things like that?
Right. Some of the breakthroughs that we've made is that we made the discovery that autism doesn't look like autism during infancy in most babies. And that one of the earliest signs that a child is going to either later have a diagnosis of autism or communication delay or impairment is motor delay during infancy. And also we learned that children's social initiations as early as 14 months predicts their communication competence when they're adolescents. So
Wow.
that goes back to Andy's point about parents don't wait and see. If somebody has a concern or you have a concern, go ahead and get the developmental assessment. It's going to be win-win no matter what. And early intervention is very powerful. We've also found that some of the things that people used to consider that were lifelong difficulties for autism, we're able to actually strengthen those skills in 2-year-olds with the right kind of intervention. So, and that those abilities then last a lifetime. So the things that we'd like to let people know about right now is that we have a study going on of infant siblings of children of autism, and we're also including babies who don't have an autistic older sibling. And we're looking at how they learn speech. And so this is really relevant. And that way, if we do identify babies who are having difficulty learning speech, things can be done about it really early. We've also got a study going on right now that provides free intervention for children who are 1 and 2 and early 3-year-olds, that it's a 12-week intervention 2 times per week, and it's free.
That's wonderful.
That's really great. And then we have a wonderful screening study that's really great. Parents can do everything online for 1 and 2-year-olds. And then we have an amazing study for children who are autistic between 4 and 6 years who are also having anxiety. So these are just some of the studies that we have. We also have a study for adults who are autistic who are experiencing GI difficulties.
Okay. And if any listeners or viewers are interested, I guess the best course of action is to go to Kennedy Krieger's, to your website specifically to learn more about that.
They can, or they can email us at reach, just REACH at kennedykrieger.org.
Wonderful. Andy, I was wondering if you could tell us some of your favorite resources and supports that you personally could suggest for viewers and listeners, whether they have a loved one on the spectrum or maybe they just want to know more about autism.
So the first advice I got, was to connect with other parents, other autistic adults. And that's the number one thing I would suggest. And also the thing is find someone to talk to. One of the number one service we provide is information and referral. There is a lot of organizations of people with autism. Some of them get a lot of responses that are difficult to really talk with you. Howard County Autism Society, we really focus on really talking to someone and seeing what their needs is and directing them in the right way. KKI has social workers, for example, we talked to for an appointment early on and was super helpful. Just guide us for immediate services and also a lifelong path. So it's important to talk to someone who really is familiar or professional. And that's something we provide HCAS and also KKI. We are another, resource, whether it's through social media, through the website we share at Pathfinders for Autism, finding those resources that are out there. I'm talking everything from haircuts to swimming lessons to horseback riding. There's a lot of different resources. They are, they're not always easy to find, but once you find those things, they're really important, for daily living and for growth. So, really finding those resources that are out there, that's made a big difference, to us.
Fantastic. And I know, Andy, you spoke to this beautifully earlier, so you're absolutely welcome to jump in. But why is autism acceptance so important, no matter the context, no matter the age? We're trying to raise, compassionate young people, in all of our lives, caring community. So why is autism acceptance so important? Dr. Landa, could you start?
I think the person who learns about autism and accepts them and enjoys them has just given themselves a diamond. I think that autism affects 1 in 36 people. So everybody is going to know somebody with autism. And so if there's a neighbor or your child has a classmate or, a coworker is autistic or has an autistic child or grandchild, ask for opportunity, to learn and because it's not hard. It's just different.
Andy, any parting words?
We think about why autism acceptance is important. The things that autistic people need are what everybody needs. And when we make our society more accepting of people with disabilities, we all benefit. One example people probably know about really well is curb cuts. Curb cuts were first put into place to help wheelchairs. Now they're used by everybody, strollers, seniors, so making our society more accepting is something that makes us all better. When we think about the potential in our community, for, growing our economy, how do we get all the talent that's out there? We can't leave people with disabilities, and people with autism, on the side. I just like to just think about, imagine how it looks to the other person, how much a big difference it makes when you can be accepting of a person with autism. And, I could just say living here in Howard County, I feel a lot of acceptance at grocery stores, retail locations, gyms. I feel like people are really accepting, and that makes a huge difference. And that hasn't, people with autism, we're not going to put people in institutions. They should live in our community to live their fullest life. And you can make a big difference. Everyone can make a big difference in making the lives of people with autism, meet their full potential, out there.
Well said. Well, thank you so much to both Dr. Rebecca Landa and Andy Stettner for spending time with us today and discussing autism. And thank you to all of our viewers and listeners as well. Make sure you visit ChesapeakeFamily.com for up-to-date local information on home, health, and living for today's Maryland parent. This episode will be archived on ChesapeakeFamily.com in video and podcast format. I'm Laura Boycourt with Chesapeake Family Life and Third Floor Views. Thank you so much for joining us.